Welcome everyone to Risk Management 3.0, moving from compliance to competitive advantage. This webinar is presented by Strategic Decisions Group and co-sponsored by the Colorado Space Business Roundtable. My name is Claire Robinson and I am your moderator today. And now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Dr. Jennifer Meyer has 30 years of experience as a strategy consultant, decision scientist, educator, and author. She has supported manufacturing, transportation, and capital-intensive clients with major investment decisions, strategy development, economic evaluation, and business portfolio modeling. Jennifer leads SDG's consulting practice in North America and is the head of the aerospace practice. She is a co-author of the 2016 book, Decision Quality: Value Creation for Better Business Decisions. Jennifer, welcome to today's webinar.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Also with us today is Bob Cohn. Bob has 3 decades of experience and accomplishment in aerospace at NASA and several private companies, working in civil, commercial, and national security programs. He has held leadership positions in business development, international trade, policy, and risk management. He holds a risk management professional certification from PMI. Bob is a director of aerospace business development at SDG and concurrently chair of the Colorado Space Business Roundtable. Bob, welcome to today's webinar.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We'd also like to introduce Patricia Rodriguez, who will be answering some of your questions online today. Patricia is an engagement manager with Strategic Decisions Group and was a member of the project team that worked on the case example in today's webinar. Patricia, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Clara. Glad to be here.
And now, let me turn it over to our first speaker. Bob, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. We're excited to see everyone on our webinar today and really excited about what we have to share with you. I want to go through the agenda and point out a couple things as we before we get started here. So first of all, we will be doing a few polls along the way, so be prepared for those. Secondly, I want to point out the topic or the theme of this webinar is aimed at the aerospace industry. That's where my background comes from. However, these examples that we're providing really apply broadly across many different industries, and hopefully y'all can kind of make those translations as we go through. So to go through the agenda, we have 4 sections in the webinar today. We'll start out with kind of the current approaches to risk management in complex projects, basically the way risk management typically is done today. We'll then move into beyond compliance with risk management 2.0, and then moving to a competitive advantage through risk management 3.0, and then we'll have a quick wrap up at the end. One of the other things I wanted to point out is, you know, as in many industries, risk management is an important project management practice. And in NASA's risk management document, I want to get this quote right. They actually provide this quote: risk management is an integral aspect of virtually every challenging human endeavor. So pretty lofty and pretty broad claim there, but I do think that's true. So as we've been talking, risk management is a standard element in aerospace project management and operations to ensure safety, reliability, and mission success. It's often also a collaborative effort amongst many stakeholders involved in a project. There are many ways to do this structured approach. In aerospace, there are 3 predominant standards that are typical, I would say. The one is the DoD Guide for Risk Management. The second one I mentioned earlier is NASA's NPR 8000.4C. And then a third one is the Project Management Institute Risk Management Standards. All of these are fairly similar to each other and are often followed in aerospace projects. For those of you in other industries, you might be more familiar with the ISO standard. There's obviously other standards as well. They are all roughly similar, I would say. There are nuanced differences in each of them. The PMI standard, for example, actually does address opportunity management, which is the next point I'd like to make, which is that the primary focus of all of these practices is usually on avoiding problems that could interfere with project cost, schedule, and technical performance. While PMI does have call out opportunity management or the upside risk management, in practice, most commonly, again, in my experience, it's risk management is focused on avoiding problems or avoiding negative outcomes. So I'd also like to just note, though, that NASA's requirements both address risk-informed decision-making and continuous risk management. But again, downside risk is kind of the focus of all of these practices. So that brings us to our first poll. We'd like to get a snapshot of our participants today and your role in risk management. We have 5 options for this poll. They are, as a leader, I use risk management to monitor our complex projects. I routinely contribute to risk management on complex projects. I'm not directly involved in project-focused risk management. Our organization doesn't practice project-focused risk management, or I'm not familiar with risk management in our organization. So this is a select one. Please pick the one that is most applicable to your connection to risk management in your organization. I can see everyone chiming in here. We're getting really encouraging results here, and I'll show you those in just a second. As soon as I see the tick off slow down here, we're going to move to results, but I appreciate everyone clicking on the option that most accurately reflects your role. All right, it looks like they're slowing down, Clara. Let's look at the results of that poll. So that's great. The top 2 are the 2 biggest ones, and those are the most engaged. So we see a lot of folks routinely contribute to risk management projects, meaning they have familiarity with how the process works, and quite a few who are leaders who actually use risk management to monitor complex projects and make decisions. So great results there. We have about a fourth of you are not directly involved, and then another 10% that either your organization doesn't practice or you're just not familiar. So very top-heavy results there. We like to see that. That's great. Let's go back to the slides now, Clara. So as we noted, many risk managers use a risk register to capture the relevant risks and report on status and facilitate regular reviews. Typically, these risk registers are built from the bottom up. I've done quite a few of these myself, and I can tell you that the typical way that I've gone about it, and I've seen others go about this, is you meet generally one-on-one with each of the key SMEs on a project team. They identify their key threats, you capture those, and then for those that are deemed significant, a formal risk is actually opened and the likelihood and consequences are assessed. Subsequent to that, risk owners are identified and response actions are defined and implemented to reduce or eliminate the risk. The focus throughout this process is on specific risk items and the actions to address each one of them until they're resolved. Risks are then reviewed for status, threat reduction, and overall resourcing on a regular basis. In my experience, this is often a monthly risk review meeting or risk management board. Whatever the name is, there's a certain cadence that organizations set up, and they review progress on their risks and also potentially new risks occurring.
Hey, Bob, I have a question for you. I wonder if we could get some input from folks on how well they think the risk management process is working for those who are participating. I think if we go back one step.
Oh, did we? Yes, thank you.
One more forward.
Thank you. I must have clicked over it. All right, apologies. Thank you, Jennifer, keeping me on track. So our second poll today, this one's a little bit different. You're going to select all that apply in this situation. The question is, if you do use risk management for complex projects, in your opinion, how well is it working? Again, we have 5 options, but in this case, check any and all that apply. The options are: we check the boxes and list our project risks. We list project risks and effectively manage them. We use high-level risk management insights to understand and communicate. We springboard from risk management to important strategic decisions. Or, I don't know, I'm not applicable, I'm just not familiar with risk management in our organization. So please check all those that apply in this situation. We're trying to get a sense of overall how well you all think risk management is working in your situation. I can see results are still coming in. When we slow down here, I'll move back to the results and show you all where we are. Again, I can see the results coming in, and there's a lot of participation in risk management here. Still see votes coming in. If you can get all your boxes checked, please do. I'm going to close the poll in a couple seconds. Still coming in. Okay, it's hovering. Let's look at the results, Clara. So it looks like a lot of people list projects and effectively list project risks and effectively manage them, and they actually use risk management insights to understand and communicate. That's the bulk of our participants, which is great. That you know, it's an active program and it's being effective. Our goal in today's webinar is to show you how we can springboard from risk management to important strategic decisions. It looks like not quite a fourth of you are already doing that, which is also very encouraging. So super. Why don't we get back to the slides now, Clara? Thank you. Thanks again, Jennifer, for getting me on track. So in these risk management practices, there are a number of benefits and shortcomings. We'll talk about the benefits first. First of all, you know, doing risk management, generating a risk report is compliant with contract requirements. In aerospace, that's a common occurrence where either NASA, the DoD, or what other agencies require that you perform it, and sometimes there are actually deliverables associated with that as well. Another benefit is it provides a detailed view of threats to program execution. It identifies mechanisms to address and avoid these risks, and is a simplistic qualitative approach that nearly any organization can perform. On the other side of that, there are some shortcomings. First of all, the focus, as I already mentioned, is on avoidance of negatives, not on an attainment of a positive outcome. And this may promote a sort of check the box mentality. I know I've been in many risk meetings where you have, you know, literally over 100 risks, and the meetings get long, the list is long, the details are long, the actions are long, and it does tend to kind of want to push a group into a more of a check the box mentality because of that. You know, it's not always the case, but there's always kind of a tendency, I think, for that. The process also does not directly support risk-informed decision-making in most cases. There's also inconsistencies between projects that make translation and comparison very difficult. There's actually also no intent to quantitatively analyze where resource investments will have the most impact, and a limited capability to determine trade-offs between risk and opportunity resource allocations, especially if you're not even tracking opportunities. And finally, on our list today, the emphasis on risk avoidance may overshadow a balanced approach to risk and rewards, potentially affecting the project's overall success. For more information on this, you'll see a footer at the bottom. We do have an actual webinar titled The Pitfalls of Heat Maps, Powerful Alternative Risk Management Methods, that I believe we'll have posted in the chat for you all, for anyone interested in looking at that. So despite the imperfect nature of risk management, it's still required, and it does provide some value, but you can do better. So I'm going to define here a couple terms that you've seen in our marketing of this event. Before I even get to that, though, I want to define decision quality because this is the first time we introduced that term. SDG has been in the business of decision quality support for 40 years, helping hundreds, if not thousands of clients, many of them Fortune 100 companies across a wide range of industry sectors. And that's where a lot of our tools and the value add that we're showing you today comes from. So you've seen us use this term risk management 2.0 in our marketing for the event. We've picked a challenge involved with risk management to address in risk management 2.0. One I just noted a minute ago, that oftentimes you have a very long list of specific risks that is tough to manage, and it's also difficult for leadership to see what's really going on because it's so detailed and in the weeds and so long. We're going to show you a solution of adding a top-down perspective for insight, where we make the connection between risk categories and value metrics, which enables the development of a real meaningful risk strategy. In Risk 3.0, which again you've seen in our marketing of this event, we picked another challenge. Risk management uses subjective quality measures to choose specific actions that are unlikely to address larger strategic issues, particularly given a typical focus on avoiding problems. Our solution for here is to connect your risks and values with the strategic decisions that you know you're going to make for the project, and use proven analytical methods to quantify strategic risks and opportunities, and then make explicit trade-offs and ultimately choose the highest value path for the project. That's where we're hoping to get to. So in our next section, we will move into that risk management 2.0 beyond compliance, where Jennifer will walk us through how we can achieve that level of performance. Jennifer?
All right, thank you, Bob. So we know that many of you are going to have experience with traditional risk management, and many of you also mentioned that you are leaders who utilize the insights from risk management to oversee what's going on. This next step here is really tailored towards trying to make that traditional risk management process easier to see what's going on and to make some key connections. And we're going to do that by adding a top-down perspective, as Bob mentioned. The purpose there is to give a big picture overview of how things are fitting together, use that to do some prioritization, and also link up to the value metrics that are really important in your particular project. That's going to get us to what we call risk management 2.0. So those of you who do lead different projects, you know that it can be very tedious to consider hundreds of individual risks. You need a way to manage the risk from a higher level perspective. That's where the introduction of categories of risk are going to turn out to be really helpful here. Many of you may already do this. We're going to add another layer on top of that. A category of risk is going to help us actually create a risk category rating that's going to make it easier to prioritize from the very beginning. This is going to get us a mechanism to enable better planning for a risk strategy, a strategy to actually address risk. And that's going to be even more powerful when we connect it up, those risk categories, connecting them to the value metrics that you care about. So we're going to show you how this works with an example from a client that we work with. So consider a launch services company who wanted to vertically integrate into rocket engine manufacturing. By the way, this is a real example from a real client situation. However, it has been heavily disguised. We're very protective of our clients' confidentiality. So this is in fact not, you may be thinking you know who this company is. I can assure you it is not that company. It's been very much disguised. But it is based on a real situation where this challenge of vertical integration was really important. So this company had been around for quite a while. They had demonstrated their expertise in building rockets and providing launch services but now they were considering a move to actually manufacture their own rocket engines. And this was partly motivated because recently their R&D team had identified some pilot engine technologies that could offer them a real competitive advantage in engine manufacturing. They had actually made a commitment with their leadership within the organization to move in this new direction. In fact, they had gone as far as acquiring an older facility in a small city. It was one of the few possible locations that would be suitable to do some engine manufacturing like this. They'd already acquired it, and now the plan was to expand that facility's footprint significantly and convert it into a cutting-edge manufacturing site using the new technology that they were developing. So this was a very exciting time, lots of visibility within the leadership team, and lots of pressure on the project team to deliver. They needed to move quickly in order to exploit this particular competitive opportunity, and they engaged us to help them with that risk management process. So like you might already have, and as many people will already have, they had a list of bottom-up risks to start with that had been developed, and we helped them enrich that further. Here's an illustrative subset of the kinds of risks that were showing up. So lots of different risks here. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see an issue related to the conversion of the existing facility. Would that existing facility actually be able to be turned into this new manufacturing site? Lower left-hand corner, there was an issue about the cost of raw materials for actually building the engines once the facility was up and running. There'd been a lot of variability in some of those raw materials costs. Another example, the upper right-hand corner, the attraction of new customers. So they had launch services customers, but could they actually reach other customers that would be interested in just the engines themselves? So that was another kind of question. And an interesting dynamic, given that this was in a small city, in the lower right-hand corner, there was a risk related to not having enough trained local workers. So, and of course, there were many more than this. We're just giving you a few examples of particular risks that could come up. In order to make this easier to manage, this is when we shifted into the step one that you can take when you start working toward risk management 2.0. We're synthesizing individual risks into those risk categories that are going to make it easier to manage and prioritize those risks. For example, two of the risks that you saw in the previous slide, one was vertical integration by others. Are there going to be other competitors that are going to come about that are doing vertical integration? And maybe there are just other new competitors in the engine manufacturing space. These are two examples of risks in the category of the competitive environment. So we figured out this grouping. There were others as well. So there were things related to cost of components of raw materials. There were issues related to that local skilled labor pool, issues related to demand, marketing effectiveness. This was an interesting question. They could potentially retain their current customers, and they could also potentially attract new customers, but both of those, there were some risk associated there. There were also some risks associated with the technical success of the new technology that they were trying. There were community concerns related to bringing in a whole bunch of new workers into this location, and also the land acquisition that was necessary to expand the footprint of this particular facility. There was also the potential of permitting delays because of zoning changes required and some of the land that they would be acquiring, also potential impacts related to air and water kinds of issues. And another example, issues for the design of that facility itself. Could they actually convert it effectively? Is the structure actually sound for the existing facility? So you can see there, and of course, this is a subset of the risks that come out in a situation like this, but imagine how much simpler it is to manage a set of something like 9 here instead of all of those different ones. In the actual case, we had close to 150 individual risks after we did the first level of investigation, and we had about 13 categories. Certainly that's easier to manage than 150 individual risks. So what do we do once we have these risk categories? The categories themselves, don't tell us a whole lot, but they actually give us some insight. The real question is, which of these are really important? So now we move to making ratings of the risk categories themselves, not the individual risks yet. That's a much more tedious process. But what we're going to do is actually take a look in our second step. We take a look at the individual risks in the categories with the subject matter experts, and then they judge the rating for each category as a whole. We're going to use dimensions similar to the individual risks. We're going to look at the likelihood of a significant occurrence within that particular category. We use the same kinds of scales as you might be used to. Then we'll also assess the consequence of a significant occurrence in each category. And that allows us to come up with a kind of a heat map that's just about the risk categories themselves. All of a sudden, we have a new level of insight. We still haven't done the individual risk ratings. We can do that later, but now we can actually prioritize which of those categories is most important for us to focus on the individual ratings. We're going to do them all, but now that we know this priority, we can actually develop a risk strategy that focuses on the ones that are the biggest concern to the group that's working on this particular project. So this was a key insight for the group. It actually helped with coordination of communication and so forth with the leadership. Another key to mention here was assigning a risk category owner. Many of you are familiar with assigning risk owners and sometimes even risk treatment owners, but those are all on those individual details. We want actually someone who's going to manage all of the risks within a particular category. That's the risk category owner, and that can actually, that person will be able to oversee the activities going on with all of those individual risks. So this becomes a very useful communication tool here. But another thing that was interesting as we worked through this, we took assessments of the risk categories initially. That then helped us prioritize the work on the individual risks. It also gave us a mechanism to come back later and see, does the set of ratings we have for the individual risks, does that actually seem to be consistent with how we rated the overall category? And that created some very interesting conversations for the quality of the different judgments that we're making along the way. So risk categories, risk category ratings, risk category owners are a key piece. The last step for Risk Management 2.0 is to actually map those risk categories. There they are, the same categories. Map those to the organization's most important value metrics. You might notice there is not a risk category for schedule or cost. There's a very significant reason for that. Those are actually the outcomes for all of these other kinds of things. But now we're going to layer on our value metrics, and the schedule and cost are actually examples of some of the intermediate value metrics that matter. Over here on the right-hand side, we've got intermediate value metrics of R&D, operating expense, capital investment. And for example, capital investment, that is significantly affected by things like procurement costs, but also community concerns, the design issues with the existing facility, the potential, those key inputs have an impact on that intermediate value metric of capital investments. And then there's a whole bunch of things that have to do with impact on the ultimate production capacity for the rocket engines and also the timing of when that capacity comes available. So this ended up being an interesting discussion, but also, of course, ultimately for this particular client, the key metric was economic value. There were actually multiple value metrics that were important, and we created schematics like this for each of the different value metrics that were critical. Things like environmental impact, safety, goodwill, a number of things like that can be very critical value metrics to be considered in this kind of exploration. And this tool, actually for this client, became a very powerful mechanism for talking with the leadership about how to prioritize attention. The combination of the heat map on the previous slide and this schematic turned out to be very good bases for discussions with the leadership.
Yeah, Jennifer, I'd just like to add to what you shared that there were, in this situation, there were a number of very positive observations from the team that we were working with And those observations were kind of ran the gamut from pretty simple to more complex. A simple one was it just provided a quick view of risk exposure by the company's main functional areas, and that was helpful to them. More detailed one was that doing the category assessments first before the much lengthier individual risk assessments were performed gave the leadership team a better snapshot of where the risks, the major risks were, the driving factors in this particular project, which allowed them to do a little more pre-planning and resource allocations and things like that before they had actually gone through the lengthy process of the risk assessment. So a lot of really positive feedback that came out of this work. So that brings us to our next poll. Jennifer just covered what we defined as Risk Management 2.0. Now we'd like to know from you which additional benefits that Jennifer just covered would you get if your organization moved to Risk Management 2.0. This is another select all that apply poll. Again, we have 5 options in this situation. Please pick all that apply to you. Better top-down insights about critical risk categories, clear high-level connection between risk and value, risk strategy focused on the most important risk categories, more effective communication with leadership, or none of the above. Again, please select all that apply in this particular poll. I can see your answers coming in now. I appreciate everyone clicking.
Bob, one thing that's kind of interesting thinking about these critical risk categories, we were very purposeful not to define the risk categories before we started the list of individual risks, because that was a way for us to make sure that we weren't limiting the thinking to, for example, functional areas or something like that. We actually did a series of interviews with subject matter experts, but we did not limit them to think about their functional area. And we ended up creating some risk categories that they had not previously thought of. So that's an important aspect of how we build up those categories.
Yeah, that's a great subtlety that we dealt with there. Okay, it looks like the votes are slowing down. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to select, so let's look at the results now, Clara, if we could. So a lot of people like the high-level connection between risks and value, and risk strategy focused on the most important risk categories. More effective communication was also very popular, and then better top-down insights about risk categories was fairly popular. So that's great feedback. We appreciate that. It also sort of tells us we're giving you interesting content here today. So thank you everyone for participating in that poll.
All right, well, so it is exciting to see so many people seeing potential value for changing the way that they think about risk management with these kinds of tools. And you may be observing some of those already. By being really disciplined about this 2.0, you can certainly add some additional value on all those different dimensions. And the next question is, can you do even better? Here's where we get into the potential to add real competitive advantage through risk management 3.0. So for this particular client, even after they had better insights about their risks, their priorities, the value metrics that were really important to them, there were still some important questions to be answered. So I'd like you to put yourself in the shoes of a company that's thinking about this kind of vertical integration. Lots of attention on those specific individual risks. Now we even have the attention on risk categories. But one of the things that came out is that there were still some gaps. One was, how could they understand the true impact of the different categories of their risks? Yes, we had ratings that showed the likelihood of a significant occurrence and the impact of a significant occurrence, but they really wanted a better way to quantify the uncertainty related to those risks, and actually wanted to be thinking about both upside and downside for their project. There is another key question that comes out. If you find yourself in a situation where you've got better clarity about those risk categories and maybe even starting to quantify them, the next challenge is, what could you do to actually improve the value of your project? And here's the opportunity to go beyond the specific decisions related to management of individual risks and actually make a connection to the more strategic decisions that are still to be considered. This is where you get that real competitive advantage. Now you're no longer in a defensive mode, you're actually being offensive and actually finding ways to improve your value. So if you put yourself in the shoes of a company the company like we're talking about here, if they want to make the connection between key strategic decisions and the risk categories, what might they come up with? So consider how these specific decisions might impact the risks that we just talked about and also the value of this vertical integration challenge. One question, how much additional work should be done to advance the technology before you start working on actually incorporating it into and starting to build those rocket engines? So we're going to add those now to, going to have them at the bottom of the slide here. So how much technological advancement would you invest in? Another, what level of expansion would actually be most beneficial? Should you go for a full size expansion right off the bat? Would you want to do something slower pace initially and then expand later after you see the success? Would you want to do some things where you do a little bit more testing before you do any expansion at all? And another dimension, what marketing infrastructure would add the most value? If you are going to manufacture these engines, what kind of infrastructure would be needed to market them? Now, once you think about these decisions, you can start to recognize, wow, there really are going to be connections between these big decisions and the kinds of risks that we've already identified. So if we return to looking at the schematic we created before with our risk categories in those rounded rectangles, our intermediate value metrics in the ovals, and then the ultimate value metric, just one of them shown here in the octagon, let's think about this level of expansion. If we make a different choice about level of expansion, that certainly will affect capital, but does it also affect risks? The answer is yes, certainly. So now we see a linkage between the level of expansion and the capital investment, but remember that question about the availability of local skilled labor. That's also going to be impacted by the level of expansion. So that could actually increase the risk if the level expansion is higher. There could also be more community concerns because maybe we have to find housing for more workers, or we have to acquire more land. There could also be more challenges with the design issues related to the existing facility if we're doing more expansion, and maybe even impacts on permit delays as well. So it's an illustration that we've been thinking about risk management, but we cannot actually separate risk management from the key decisions that still remain. And we would see other connections to the other decisions related to technology advancement or marketing infrastructure. So this move to actually thinking about the decisions has a big impact on our understanding of our risks and ultimately on our value. So if you can make this connection, this is what we're calling here step 4 to get you towards risk management 3.0. Step 5 goes one step further to say, okay, now that we understand how these things are connected, we can gather information about these, but let's really turn that into a quantification of the value of the alternatives that we face. And we want to look at the full range of uncertainty that we have, considering both the downside and the upside related to the choices that we have. So we're going to show you here a couple of examples of the kinds of analysis that happen, that can happen once you actually quantify value of your alternatives. You can think about creating a waterfall of value. Imagine you can calculate the expected value, that is the probability weighted average of the different alternatives you face. You can also break down, where does the value come from? Maybe it comes from one particular geography. Maybe it comes from one particular customer class. A number of different ways you could break down that value. And also, what are the most significant costs? Is it really the marketing, or is it more the operating expense, or is it more the long-term management of the company? Lots of different components of cost that you could look at in a waterfall of value. Another really critical thing that ties directly back to this notion of risk management is a tornado diagram. Many of you may be familiar with this diagram. In order to understand the impact of the risks and figure out which ones are quantifiably the most important, we draw a tornado diagram starting from what we know the probability weighted average is. That becomes the line down the center of this tornado. Then we look at each significant risk on its own. How much could each individual risk affect the value of one of our alternatives? So here, the top bar in the tornado, this is the individual risk that has the most impact, the biggest swing from left to right. If the risk is low, then we might actually have a very high value in terms of net present value. If the risk is high, we might actually reduce the value clear down to the other end here. So we look at the impact of each individual risk, and then we stack these in order of largest to smallest. Obviously, we want to put our attention on the top bars of the tornado here. We'll create this schematic, this tornado diagram for each different alternative that we have, and that'll give us a profile for how the risks are different for different alternatives. Ultimately, we want to compare the range of outcomes, the total range of different things that could happen for each one of our alternatives. So here in this graphic on the right, we're showing the range of outcomes for 5 different alternative approaches to moving forward. And we're showing the range from the P10 to the P90 for each different alternative. And we're also showing the expected value and even the P50, that's the dotted line here. You can see that what we ultimately want is to be to the right and less downside. So this is actually the best alternative here. We have much more upside and we have less downside, and the expected value is higher. This is what we're going to be looking for when we quantify the value of the different alternatives. And it's almost always the case that we come up with very interesting insights when we're looking at these waterfalls, tornadoes, and flying bars. We can often create an alternative that's even better than the first set that we might come up with. If you'd like to know more about these tools and the methods that we apply, these analytical tools and quantitative methods, you can see our previous webinar where we talked about rising to the challenge in aerospace today, better decisions in a rapidly changing environment. You'll see a specific example there. So this is all about getting to risk management 3.0. Bob mentioned the concept of decision quality earlier. The steps that we're laying out here are actually designed to help move towards higher quality on several of these links in the decision quality chain. We know that we want to have a high quality frame when we're making decisions. We want to be very clear on what is the problem we're trying to solve. We also need to consider alternatives, particularly for these big strategic choices where the bets are large, the consequences are significant, and it's very hard to undo. We want to think about alternatives before we make a commitment to action. And we want to get the information that describes what value we might get for each one of those alternatives. That means we've got to represent that uncertainty that lies at the heart of risk management. So we need to describe what we know and what we don't know by using ranges of uncertainty. We're going to describe the outcomes in terms of the values that we care about. You'll notice we made the connection to values multiple times in the steps we're suggesting for improving risk management. And ultimately, for that quantification, we have to make sure that we use reasoning tools that account appropriately for the uncertainty that is going to be so critical in the thinking that we're doing about these strategic alternatives. And of course, as we go through, we want to make sure that we are building the commitment that's needed in order to move forward. So how did these links of decision quality come up in the specific suggestions we've made today? First of all, your initial risk register is a way to gather information and start thinking about narrowly defined risks. Typically, again, that is qualitative. They're difficult to compare across projects. We also have seen examples where a particular category that has more and more detail, that may actually create a sense that it's super important, but in fact, that may not be any more important than another category that has less risks. So there's some limitations to how much information you can get from that traditional risk register. But when we move to risk management 2.0 with those risk categories, now we have better information and we're starting to make the connection to values and building more effective risk strategies. And then as we move forward into quantification, risk management 3.0 gives you better insight into what's really going on with using these reasoning tools, and you get a lot more clarity into the value and risk of the different alternatives that you actually face for the strategic choices that can impact the project that you're working on. And you'll be able to do it in a way that is based on an appropriate understanding of the risks and uncertainty, both upside and downside, both. And of course, if you'd like to learn more, there are resources for that. One of those is the Decision Quality book that many of you may be familiar with. So that's kind of the connection between the decision quality framework and the different dimensions of risk management 2.0 and 3.0 that we've talked about. Bob, I think you wanted to talk a bit more about the benefits from risk management 3.0.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. That was great. I appreciate it. So the kind of boiling all that down to the benefits for the two groups, the risk managers and the decision makers, what we see is that for the risk manager, the quantification that provides true insight into risks that are most important. That's a great benefit. We also think that the connection between risk management activities and strategic outcomes specifically is of massive value, and then the better clarity on what needs to happen for effective risk management in the context of decisions. Additionally, then for decision makers, they get a true insight into what decisions matter and how they're impacted by individual risks. They have better motivation to focus on proactive decision making rather than just defensive risk management. We brought that point up a number of times today, that proactive decision making, seeking value rather than defending against bad things that could happen. And then finally, competitive advantage. This offers the potential for accelerated value generation by choosing better alternatives that generate value faster for the organization. So those are kind of the key takeaways, I would say, of risk management 3.0 for those two groups of people. So that is the bulk of our program today. We're going to jump into a quick wrap up now of kind of what we covered. And I also have one more poll that I'd like to share with you all. So we've described, this is again a recap, risk management 2.0. We talked about many of the challenges. We showed you a couple solutions, adding a top-down perspective, establishing a connection between the risk categories and value metrics, and then being able, therefore, to develop a meaningful risk strategy for the project or the organization. Again, recapping in risk management 3.0, we showed you how to connect your risk and values with strategic decisions, which is often absent, and using proven analytical methods to quantify the strategic risk and opportunities to allow explicit trade-offs and therefore to choose the highest value path for the project. So that brings us to our last poll today. We'd like to get a sense from everyone participating in the webinar, how applicable is this content to the needs of your organization? This is another select all that apply. We only have 4 options in this situation. They are extremely applicable. We would benefit from 2.0 and 3.0 adoption now. Very beneficial, or I'm sorry, very applicable. We should start on 2.0 and consider the adoption of 3.0. Somewhat applicable, we should start a few ideas and expand to 2.0, or not applicable, this doesn't seem applicable to our environment. Again, select, is this a select all that apply?
I think maybe we can ask people to pick one of these choices.
Yes. Let's choose one, even though it says select all that apply. So thank you. I can see your votes coming in. I appreciate everyone hanging in there here to the end and giving us one more set of data to look at. This helps us guide, future webinars and our future discussions in terms of aiming this to be as applicable as possible. Looks like a few votes are still trickling in. I'm going to hold off for just a couple seconds. Please get your votes in. All right, Claire, I think we're tailing off now on the participation. Let's look at the results. So that's very encouraging. The top two obviously are the most enthusiastic responses we had in this particular poll. 27% of you thought you should immediately adopt 2.0 and 3.0 now. More than half of you think starting with 2.0 right now and considering aspects of 3.0 makes sense. Another quarter of you think that there are a few ideas that you could start with now and expand to 2.0. And then only 4% say that it doesn't really apply to them. So very good, very encouraging results.
Hey, Bob, I'm interested in looking at, if we think about the profile that we had earlier in terms of the folks that most of the folks were either leaders who use the insights from risk management to make judgments, or they're people who are heavily involved. I'm actually pretty excited that we got such a strong response. You will notice that in what we talked about, there's a lot of the risk management 2.0 things that you could get started on right away, and then potentially expand to a more sophisticated way to do risk management 2.0. So at least a quarter of folks thought that would be useful. I'm also excited to see that about half the group thought it was worthwhile to get started on 2.0 and even stretch to that 3.0 adoption, because that's really more of a stretch. The things we did in risk management 2.0 about adding categories, doing category ratings, developing a risk strategy, looking at that map of how risks are connected to your ultimate value metrics. That's there certainly are several things there that you can get started on yourself, and then you can improve further on 2.0. And then considering that 3.0, that's where we really see the potential for people to tackle something new, to break the mindset of that defensive mechanism. And it's really exciting to see that there are about a quarter of the folks here who recognize the benefit for both 2.0 and 3.0 right away. So that's very encouraging.
Yes, it is. All right, Clara, if we could jump back to the slides. So continuing with our recap very quickly here, we showed you that using some of these tools and techniques allows you to move to risk management 3.0. We talked about quantification, establishing connections, doing both upside and downside, ultimately making better decisions for value generation for the organization. So hopefully you found something useful there. I want to end with one of our clients that we engaged in a decision quality project with came to us with about a $10 billion strategy and a couple alternatives that they were toggling back and forth between. When we engaged with them, we broadened that set of alternatives to 4 or 5, I believe, and ultimately showed them a way that they can generate $15 billion with a set of hybrid alternatives instead of the $10 billion that they came to us. So I would just say, I think this is probably pretty obvious, but for anyone who has worked in the trenches, who is constantly on a daily basis working to generate value and growth in your organization, to make a single step, over a period of a couple months from 10 billion to $15 billion is it's a pretty impressive bump up. And I think most people would love to see that kind of improvement in their strategy outlook. So that basically concludes our presentation today. I'm going to turn it back to Clara to wrap things up.